Hello and welcome to Vendor Trash. Is the title relevance to my opinions, my drawing skills, or both? That's for you to decide. Our foray further and further back into the dungeons of the past continues today as we look at those offered up by Mists of Pandaria. I think Temple of the Jade Serpent came back for Mythic Plus in Dragonflight, but I missed that season, and other than that, none of them have really been competitively relevant since like 2014. Though, like with the WoD dungeons, I basically led my challenge mode groups for these, and in this case I did them both on my Frost Mage and what was at the time my Restoration Druid. Despite all that, I have to say that the dungeons from this expansion on average weren't that great. There weren't any absolutely terrible ones, but they definitely weren't the strong suit of this overall very strong expansion, with only a few feeling like real bangers. But enough beating around the bush, let's get things started from the bottom. In 9th and last place, we have Siege of New Zhao Temple. Is anybody surprised by this one? It's pretty universally panned as the worst dungeon of the expansion, and for good reason. First of all, and this is a nitpick only I would care about, is that you shouldn't name a dungeon after an event when you can just name it after the actual location. Especially since, though the Mantid here are attempting to siege the temple, none of the dungeon actually occurs at New Zhao Temple. It's entirely on this unnamed island that just has the subzones of hollowed out tree, rear staging area, and forward assault camp. Seriously, the very end of the dungeon occurs on a bridge attempting to get you to the island with the temple, with the only part actually on that island being a tiny platform that you can only access if you're doing an achievement. But whatever, let's talk about the actual gameplay. It starts out strong enough. You're making your way through the roots of a Kaipari tree, which is a fairly unique environment, and you're given quite a bit of leeway on when you actually want to dip into the center chamber and engage the first boss, Vizier Jinbok, except you're highly incentivized to build up the buff stacks you gain from killing the ambers before you pull the boss. He summons globules himself that you need to kill before they reach him, and given the nature of the second boss, this is definitely the point you want to lust. So you're kind of in a situation similar to Stitch Flesh, where you benefit massively from stacking your limited buffs, and if you whiff it, you're gonna have a bad time. Granted, it's not nearly as dramatic, but the same principle. After that, you make your way further up the tree and out onto the terrace where we have everyone's favorite part of the dungeon, the tower defense section. Now look, I love myself a tower defense game. The Crossing was one of my favorite Warcraft 3 levels, and I played my fair share of Bloons back in the day. But this was not the place to stick one. It just winds up being incredibly frustrating, especially since you yourself have to serve as the towers, or sap throwers, while occasionally having to focus on the Amberwing ad that will pop in every now and then. But it winds up being a lot of waiting. Thankfully, there is the gong that you can click to send in waves early. The thing is, the gong only becomes clickable at certain points, so you need someone keeping an eye on it to be maximally efficient. Somehow, I think it'd actually be less frustrating if you didn't have to manage the gong. Eventually you get through it though, and the boss himself is fine. After a short bit of RP, you blow open the gates, getting knocked back a few feet if you were too close, and then carefully weave your way around a bunch of mostly optional trash on your way to the third boss, who is actually pretty well designed. It's pretty satisfying using the bombs to break through his shield, and ideally, the ads at the same time, if you tank them on top of it. And the bomb debuff does make it feel like you're progressing faster and faster as the fight goes on, which is quite nice. After him, you only have a few mildly annoying trash packs left that you can't really line of sight. Lastly, there's the fight with Wing Leader Naronok, who will twice launch himself to the opposite end of the bridge and blow everyone back until he's interrupted, which you can trivialize by simply having someone get into position ahead of time or with well-utilized mobility spells. That doesn't make it not an annoying mechanic. And look, I realize the Mantid have ground troops and artillery, so it does make sense, but it does feel a little hilarious that they're attempting to build a bridge to the temple when they can, fly. And it's not an obvious detail, but the fact that every boss is just your standard fare Mantid, and that every mob in the place is either your standard Mantid or a sap globule, does not do this place any favors. Give us a little splash of variety, for goodness sake. Despite all my complaining, it's not the worst dungeon in the game by any means, but it was the worst mob dungeon by all the means. Now, how to transition to number 8? I guess I will need to build a bridge. Actually, this transition wasn't difficult at all because in 8th place we have the other Mantid dungeon, Gate of the Setting Sun. Now, conceptually, it's already miles ahead of Siege. Fighting on the Serpent's Spine and around the main gate separating Mantid lands from Pandaren lands is a very fun idea, and there's a lot to like here, but also a lot to drive you crazy. First off are all of the smoke bomb mobs on the first stretch of the wall. I'm sorry, but as ranged, it can get very annoying to deal with. There are also all of the bombs, but I don't mind these nearly as much, and they are a good precursor to the first boss. Speaking of the first boss, Kiptalak, his aggro voice line still lives rent-free in my head over a decade later. Gate! I'm gonna bring this whole wall down! It's a messy but fun enough fight, with you needing to make sure you don't get caught up in any of the bomb lines. Then comes more annoyance. Because the second boss is accessed via an elevator, the play for any setting that doesn't care about mob count is just have the whole group book it there without killing anything. But it's a fairly long stretch without mounting, and there's always somebody that takes forever. I'd honestly prefer just killing the trash, I think. Though it is fun jumping on top of the gate to avoid getting stunned by Raigon. Striker Gadak is a decent enough boss, only really being annoying when you outgear him because you have to wait for him to do his strafing run intermission twice, usually while he's sitting at 1 HP anyway. Next comes more frustration from other players because you need to shoot down the flying mantid and go click the signal fire, which can be done at the same time so long as you split the group up. But it's guaranteed that if you do the cannons, the whole group stays up with you. And if you go to click the signal, everyone will follow you down, and then you either have to go back up or deal with fire on the wall. But the third boss and his trash are completely fine. Time to make our way down to the last boss. Guess what? A bunch of those mobs we skipped earlier are going to try chasing us down. And of course, someone doesn't know how to reset their fall damage and winds up killing themselves. Hope you have someone who can res and isn't in combat. Raigon himself is a good fight, if you're DPS. If you're the tank or healer, then obviously nobody else in the group knows how to launch themselves up and kill the weak spot, so the fight just goes on forever. At least this dungeon had the decency to make one of the bosses a Kuchang. Though yes, every other hostile mob in the place is a bog standard mantid. Look, I still like Gate. In and of itself, it's a pretty good dungeon, with my only real complaints being a lack of mob variety and the smoke bombs. 95% of my complaints are rooted in player behavior or ignorance, most of which gets ironed out in organized content. In 7th place, we have Scarlet Halls. Scarlet Halls is the mop remake / fusion of the 2 vanilla instances of Scarlet Library and Scarlet Armory, which, at least generally speaking, I'm quite okay with because while the super short Scarlet Monastery wings were a fun gimmick, that doesn't have much of a place in the modern game. And from what I can glean / recall, this place is mostly Scarlet Library with like 2 rooms from Armory, though the layout has changed a bit more than that. So we're immediately inducted into the minor inconvenience of meat buckets that we're supposed to use to make the hounds turn on their masters. And just after that, we have the training grounds from Armory, which was implemented in a not very fun manner, with you wanting to pick up the targets and trudge forward, using them as cover from the arrow fire until you can pull the trash. It's slow and pointless. After that, you get to Houndmaster Brown, who is the first of 3 bosses who have been implemented to replace very similar vanilla analogs. I don't recall him being overly difficult. We then delve down some steps into the rest of the dungeon and some of the more annoying trash, big poles and the annoying cannoneer mobs. Then, halfway through this stretch to the end, we kind of just enter the Hall of Champions to deal with Harlan, the replacement for Vanilla's Herod. And this fight encompasses my 2 biggest problems with this place. How do you replace Herod? He's iconic. And how is this not the last fight of the dungeon? It's iconic. So is the room. They even used it for the loading screen. Whatever. It's a fun fight, if not a particularly complicated one. I do think having ads come in was a good addition to make it feel more complete, and having the whirlwind actually suck you up, party members and ads alike, is a whimsical touch. Coagler, at least, winds up being more interesting than Doan was, going all in on fire spells and adding significant area denial to the fight by burning books, which is also a great bit of flavor. Of course the Scarlet Crusade would be burning away any history that they disagree with. The fight is good and a strong finish, but still, how do you not end the place with Blades of Light? Overall, it's the worst of the Mop remake dungeons, but that still puts it above a lot of what they tried to do with the Kata remake dungeons. And if you ignore my petty gripes, the only real weak points are the archery section and a few unfriendly trash packs. And it does manage to feel like an actual dungeon, even if it doesn't match its overworld representation in the slightest. Moving up to 6th place, we have Scarlet Monastery. This was the Mop remake / fusion of the 2 vanilla instances of Scarlet Graveyard and Scarlet Cathedral, And honestly, not much at all was lost. Pretty much just that initial descent down the stairs of Graveyard and the torture chamber where you fought Interrogator Vishas. Though it is a shame that Vishas himself did get cut. "I'll rip the secrets from your flesh" is way too memorable of a quote to get rid of. At any rate, the end result is basically Cathedral with one large additional room. Thalnos is fairly straightforward: kill ads and don't let them touch their fixate target. In lieu of Vishas, we got Brother Korloff before the big doors, who's just a kite/avoid firefight. Thankfully, Whitemane remains, though Renault Mogren has been replaced with Commander Durand, who just so happens to use the exact same voice lines. Again, I think making the narrative of the remakes occur during MoP was unnecessary, and removed more memorable characters. Even High Inquisitor Fairbanks is no longer alive, with the worst kept secret room ever only containing his remains now. It feels like this practice has been abandoned, and Blizz happily plucks dungeons from the past for M+, without attempting to force a narrative anymore. The Whitemane fight is remarkably easy, being the one that they most wanted to preserve the original vibes of. Evaluating the dungeon as its own creature and not as a remake, I think it's fine, though nothing crazy. I love the Scarlet Crusade itself, but I think the vibes of Priory lend themselves better to the concept of a bastion for light zealots. I know, Scarlet Monastery exists in the heart of undead territory, but the juxtaposition with Tirisfal just isn't quite as appealing to me. But aside from the nitpick of certain characters being cut or replaced, I have nothing to really complain about with this place. I just also don't have a lot to love about it either. In the dead center of the pack, at 5th place, we have Stormstout Brewery. This place feels like it was designed to be fun. And it is, but that, oddly enough, is not necessarily what makes a dungeon place super high. Anyway, from the outset, you've got a great and whimsical theme. It's a Pandaren brewery. There are Hosen ransacking the place and getting wasted. There are vermin contaminating the place. There are elementals running around. There are Stotler and Waldorf-inspired Pandaren ghosts cracking jokes at the expense of the party. And the bosses are all pretty great. Ook is very straightforward. Just dodge his smash as the tank and have party members run barrels into him. Hoptalis is very thematic, with you needing to dodge his Whirlwind and Carrot Breath, all while dealing with swarms of hoppers and boppers that you need to smash with hammers. And Yanzu is a nice mixture of abilities that change from run to run, but which aren't so transformative as to make it feel like a different fight. Deal with beer shooting out from your ears or having to move to keep stacks down. Deal with a bubble shield or ads that you need to kill and block beams from. Fly into the air to avoid carbonation on the ground, or jump to avoid moving walls of suds. It's all very fun. The trash is simple enough as well. You just need to remember to tap the tiny fire spirits at the start to greatly reduce the Hosen's health. And after a few pulls, you just kite everything into Ook room to decimate the remaining Hosen with barrels. I actually find Hoptalis' trash kind of annoying because it always winds up being one overly long pull. But at least it's quick, I suppose. And then only a few tiny pulls remain before the final room with its 3 waves of scripted trash. It's a very quick and fun dungeon, but it's ultimately not a well-designed dungeon, if you know what I mean. I hate to impose M+ mentality on it, but yeah, it really feels like a place designed to be an amusing jaunt you do on rare occasions, and not something you optimize performance on. Mostly because all of the trash feels kind of gimmicky. Moving up to 4th place, we have Scholomance. Probably the best of the MoP remake dungeons, although it was also the one that saw the most drastic changes. Only 3 of the original bosses remain: Darkmaster Gandling, Rattlegore, and Jandis Barov. And Dr. Krastanov as a rare spawn, I suppose. In addition, we have Instructor Chillheart and a controlled Lillian Voss. I'll be honest, it does suck that sizable chunks of the original dungeon were trimmed, or more ideally rearranged. I always loved the balcony overlooking Caer Darrow, where you summon Curtanos the Herald. That's just kind of gated off now. And there are lots of other sections missing as well, though I'm not too distraught about the cluster of halls populated by the Barovs and various other bosses being repurposed for a single boss fight. But I have to be honest, as an actual functional dungeon to be ran repeatedly, the remake is definitely an improvement. Old Scholomance worked great as a place you explored once and visited for quests, but was far too long for modern purposes. As for the mechanics, well, Chillheart is simple enough and feels more like a race to simply beat the ice walls. Jandis has a good concept to her that gets largely ignored because it's faster to simply kill illusions until you get lucky than to spot the real article, though I think it was more necessary in challenge modes, which I'm thankful for. Rattlegore is laughably easy if you know to just replace your bone armor every time it gets blasted off. Boss is probably the most interesting fight if you actually have to engage in phases 2 and 3. Did you know there's a phase 2 and 3? Yeah, when's the last time we didn't massively outgear the DPS check to skip them? I do think it's a bit of a design flaw that so much time is saved if you meet the check. But yeah, this fight has fixates and fires to avoid and pounces and stuff. Crazy. Ganling is a simple enough fight, but his main mechanic is probably one of the most impactful. One player having to clear out their lesson room while the rest of the group has to endure while down a member. It's a nice shakeup, especially since I believe tanks and healers can be sent away as well. I mean, it's a caster boss, so not the end of the world, but still. I do have one major issue with this place, and this is more of a confession than anything. Late into MoP, I was running this place on my overgeared Mistweaver, and was being cocky and making the pulls myself. After all, I could heal myself and did decent damage fist weaving. Well, the tank got annoyed and told me to cut it out. I got defensive and ignored him, and then wound up pulling too much and died, and immediately dropped group out of shame. I was arrogant. I'm sorry, random tank. I'm sorry, other group members that I abandoned. But yeah, my shame aside, it's all in all a decent enough dungeon and a decent enough remake. We've reached the top third of dungeons with number 3, Shadowpan Monastery. This one feels like the very definition of a good, solid dungeon, but not one that I particularly love. I should though, right? Like, monks training in a snowy mountain monastery is a great pitch for a dungeon. Maybe it's just my disdain for the cold? Well, at any rate, I do have to commend it for having a great start. The swarms of Pandaren you face and which ambush you always felt fun to me. Goo is an okay fight, assuming you don't outgear the dungeon so much that you wind up waiting for the serpent intermission, though it feels more like a healer fight than anything. I can't say that I love the frost arrow section. It's not super hard, nor is it particularly punishing if you fail, but it's oddly frustrating when you do. Master Snowdrift's trash is probably the worst part of the dungeon for me, at least as a caster. Nothing has a lot of health, so it's hard to get a cast off, but you only have a few active at a time, so it doesn't feel right to AoE either. And the boss fight itself feels bizarre too, because you actually want to take out the duplicates first, so it doesn't feel rewarding to figure out which is the real one. The trash to Sha of Violence is fine enough though. I enjoy how you get different configurations of the different Sha fragments, such as a mixed group or an all-regenerating group. Sha of Violence is a pretty meh fight, and then you pretty much wind up sneaking around to avoid most of the trash to Terran Zoo. I think even in challenge modes, you skipped most of it, which feels a bit weird and like it should maybe be redesigned. But the trash you do pull can be mildly annoying due to being unkillable until you purify the orbs, which, especially if you pull extra, can potentially be very tricky to manage without being interrupted by anything. It's usually not a huge issue though. Terran Zoo is probably the best fight here, with the tank needing to position himself well, and the group needing to nuke the grippy orbs and interrupt the boss. Failures will quickly fill up your hatred meter and force you to take yourself out of the fight temporarily. It doesn't feel super punishing, but it's a good foundation. I think my biggest gripe with the dungeon is the bizarre situation with the Sha. They decided to have the Sha of Violence as a boss here, yet have the Sha of Hatred be what's corrupted Terran Zoo. I know that in the lore, both of them, as well as the Sha of Anger, were imprisoned in the monastery, but it still feels weird to kind of squander them all in this one area / storyline. I mean, the 3 Sha feel very thematically overlapped as well. Anger, hatred, violence. Yeah, I think they could have come up with a better list. I get that they didn't want to copy-paste the 7 deadly sins, but this isn't any better. Whatever, I've gone off on a big tangent. Solid dungeon, not my favorite though. Coming in at second, we have Temple of the Jade Serpent, which is just all around a well-designed place that made it easy to slot in here. Seriously, the hard part of any ranking videos are the middle slots. So right off the bat, we're given a choice about which wing to start out with. Honestly, the further I've gone with this series, the more surprised I've been how rare that actually is. In fact, this is literally the only MoP dungeon that isn't completely linear. Most groups do wind up going to Wise Mari first. I really enjoy the design of his wing. The fountain makes it feel very visually distinct from the rest of the place. Mari himself is a nice unique encounter that I suspect is a bit tricky for melee in phase 1, and I know is a bit tricky for ranged in phase 2. Certainly doable, of course. I had at least one instance of having to practically solo it, which is actually totally doable as all the damage in phase 2 is avoidable. I can absolutely see why someone would hate this fight, but I don't. Our other wing is a library, which though less dramatically, does stand out. The trash here is quite commendable, as much of it is the named manifestations from the books, and I like how the path wraps around. The boss fight here is a bit of a weak spot, I feel, and it randomly being either Strife and Peril or Zhao Sunseeker doesn't actually make it feel any better. I feel like the former is the better fight, and the latter is an easier one. One neat thing I enjoyed about Late Mop was being able to solo one of the wings on my mage, while the rest of my group cleared out the other one. Granted, as soon as you started down one, people would start to switch to wherever you ran, but whatever. Either way, when you clear each wing, you're given a speed buff, which really eases the pain of traveling to the other, or to the central terrace, which has a nice clean 3 trash packs before a simple but satisfying fight with Lu Flameheart, a priestess of Yu'lon. And then just a tiny bit of trash before the Shaw of Doubt, which is a satisfying conclusion to the dungeon, and a fun but simple fight. And while it's not colossally important, the door between the start of the dungeon and the terrace opens up. I love when dungeons add shortcuts that unlock as you progress through them. Overall, a fantastic dungeon, and I'm always happy to see it. And the best mop dungeon, in my eyes, is Mogushan Palace. It is admittedly hard for me to articulate why. I just tend to have a lot of fun doing it. I guess I do tend to enjoy dungeons with big, beefy trash mobs, which this has a lot of, although the middle section does offer up some variety. I also tend to prefer places with a warmer color palette, which this one certainly does. Though again, the middle section provides aesthetic variety. You have a nice layout to begin with that allows for some line of sight pulls if you so desire. The Trial of the King encounter is a lot more fun than you would expect of a fight that's split into 3 smaller fights, but each individual component feels well designed and isn't over-designed, so it's quite manageable. Likely the largest shortcoming is just the fact that you have to send someone running to the middle of the assembly to start the RP while you're still killing trash. Afterwards, you can either wait for more RP, or navigate your way between the knockback mobs and make your way down the hidden stairs to take the secret underground path. And though it's largely pointless, I have a compulsive need to chase down and attempt to kill the scout here. Despite some stealth mobs in this stretch that will straight up stun you when they pop out, the trash here is enjoyable enough. You can either clear one of the staircases down, or jump right down into the Gekkan fight. Which, hey, a legitimate council fight inside a dungeon? With some actual choice and kill order? They all need to die for the encounter to end. You've got the Ironhide, who will mitigate 50% damage to those near him, the Skulker, who will dole out a 5-second stun, the Oracle, who will heal, and the Hexer, who will do more damage and debuff you, all in addition to Gekkan himself. CC and interrupts are all your friends here, but as long as you kick the heal and deal with the mitigation aura, there's not really a wrong way to handle this. There is one more trash pack, or not if you already killed it, before the elevator that hopefully you get the timing for and don't need to wait on. Out of the dank reprieve and back into the Imperial halls of the Mogu for a moderate amount of trash before facing off against the end boss, Shin the Weapon Master. I love this fight because while it has a lot of elements, they are completely manageable and all thematically appropriate. This guy does a frontal slam that you need to move out of, conjures fire circles with his staff, throws out axes to swing in circles, activates streams of blades at 66% and fires a constant stream of arrows to chip damage you after 33%. The fight feels completely fair and only strongly punishes you if you're genuinely reckless. I do think it would have been a nice touch if the last section of the dungeon connected back to the first part, since we only went underground because Shin locked the door behind him, but that's a minor nitpick. Except, oh wait, I ran the place for screenshots and oh my gosh, the door actually does open after the second boss. Yeah, go right after you run out from the elevator and it's open. I seriously never realized this because there was never any need whatsoever to go in that direction, but it does. This place was already number 1 on this list. It's just going for brownie points now. Lastly, a neat bit that's revealed to us during BFA questing is that there's a passage from the basement section that leads to the midpoint of Mogushan Vaults, though it's kind of a fade to black connectivity. Anyway, I love this place, I'm always happy to do it, and I just enjoy the atmosphere more than the raid, which is a bit cold, vacuous, and gloomy in comparison. And there you have it. Honestly, the middle 5 dungeons I'm very lukewarm about and could easily shift around, but I'm quite confident about putting Siege and Gate at the bottom, with Temple and Palace up at the top. For this week's drawing, obviously, I drew Mogushan Palace. The tricky part for me was definitely deciding where in the dungeon I was going to draw, because my gut instinct and the coolest part is the final boss room, but that's literally the loading screen and I kind of want to avoid doing that. But it was just obviously the best spot, so I compromised and drew it there, but at a different angle, with Shin out in front and fighting us, along with the Quailen that are actually just supposed to be the trash before him. I did have him more centralized at first, but it wound up feeling like a character drawing, which I didn't want, so I just shoved him over to the side, and it worked out for the better. I also read that supposedly the big Mogu guy on the mop loading screen is supposed to be Shin. I don't know how much I believe that, considering the resemblance is only vague and he's not a super important character in the grand scheme of things. Anyway, this one sucked to draw because it's got Chinese architecture, and Chinese architecture is super intricate and annoying. I mean, it's cool, but not if you're the one drawing it. But that should be everything. I'll catch you back in 12 weeks when we go over the Kata dungeons. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you next week. Bye-bye.